News. This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, Ed Husick and Josh Frydenberg. The big story this week in the last couple of days, of course, has been the sentence and verdict against Peter Greste and his colleagues. The Egyptian president says he's not going to intervene in the legal proceedings.
Well, this is a terrible decision, and I know that Julie Bishop is doing everything possible to try to get Peter Greste out of jail, and she has spoken to her Egyptian counterpart, Foreign Minister Shukri. She's spoken to John Kerry. She's called in the Deputy Ambassador from Egypt to make our concerns known, because the Egyptian Ambassador is currently back in Cairo. Our Ambassador, Dr. King, in Cairo is ensuring that he gets as much consular support as possible. But this is a terrible situation, and certainly the government will be doing everything possible.
Hope. Is there less hope now, given the President has said he won't intervene in the legal judicial proceedings?
Well, we just have to see how it plays out. I know that we'll be doing everything we can behind the scenes, because sometimes with these situations it's better to do that work behind the scenes as opposed to be shouting from the rooftops here at home.
And Labor's on the same page on this one.
Absolutely. I mean, Bill Shorten, as he explained in Parliament, Labor is committed to working with the government on this. It is a very painful reminder that the type of freedoms we enjoy here aren't necessarily respected in other parts of the world. And I mean, it's just shocking to see the people who are doing their job get imprisoned for it, in terms of delivering the news, and anything that can be done. I'd hope that this isn't the end of the road per se, in terms of, obviously there's an appeal process, but that's not to say that the Egyptian president might not at some later point reconsider his position, and we've certainly been encouraging him to do so and supporting government efforts, Australian government efforts, to see this through.
Let's look at some domestic politics now. The budget. I want to play you Joe Hockey responding to the Greens, saying they're going to block the re-indexation of the fuel excise.
Well, we've offered to negotiate with the Greens, but they didn't want to negotiate with us. They've shown they've just shown what hypocrites they are, because apparently they care about the environment, yet they're now opposing an increase in fuel costs. And as for the Labor Party, well, they never had any principles, and I'm surprised that they would oppose a structural reform, because when they go to the next election, they're going to have to find another source of revenue to make up for the money that is lost.
The Treasurer, during his visit this week to China, Ed Husick, first to you, this is now a $25 billion revenue hole in the government's budget savings. How much is this going to potentially be political blowback on Labor as well for not allowing some of these measures to get structural changes to go through?
The guiding principles for us in this were obviously things that affected particularly the people we represent. We weren't prepared to support. For example, the GP tax and the way that would hurt families out our way. And also in terms of broken promises. We're not there to enable the coalition government to break promises. If Joe Hockey wants a principle, how about honouring promises as a starting point principle? They went out of their way to suggest they wouldn't be doing certain things, e.g. making changes to pensions, cuts to health, cuts to education, and then they've come into government and broken the promise, and now we've seen a spectacle yesterday where they've shielded their backbench from having to get up and justify broken promises by ramming through, guillotining debate yesterday, ramming through the legislation, and not explaining to people why they were breaking their promises.
Did Labor think that you were going to get the best of both worlds here, essentially, that the Greens would allow their fuel excise through, you wouldn't have to support it, but still see a structural adjustment made, which Labor thinks is appropriate?
Well, the Greens were backwards and forwards as to what they were going to do on this issue. Labor was rock solid from day one. We said we wouldn't support it. And we wouldn't support it because it had hurt particularly families out in Western Sydney that are reliant on car transport, and it would hit family budgets.
This is a massive problem for the government, and it makes an early election all the more likely, doesn't it? $25 billion out of your nearly $40 billion in proposed savings. That's That's a huge chunk.
Well, it's a massive problem for the Australian economy and for the Australian people.
And for the government as well. So it's been your agenda.
And a real challenge for us. But it's not $25 billion worth of savings Labor's blocking. It's actually $40 billion worth of savings. And if you talk about broken promises, Ed, let's go back to the promises you made before the last election for a whole series of savings that you have now not stood by now that you're in opposition. So Labor and the Greens were in partnership, Kieran, in government. Now they're being a partnership in opposition in their grand hypocrisy. And this is, as you say, a real challenge. And if you go through item by item, we think they're in the best interests of the Australian people, particularly as we are paying back nearly $300 billion worth of Labor's debt, and that is saving over time more than $16 billion.
I want to ask you about the renewable energy target. The government's panel looking at the RET, as it's known, the renewable energy target, has commissioned modelling, the preliminary modelling, suggesting that while in the short term household bills are going to be higher, in the longer term it's actually going to be cheaper, that it's going to make household bills less expensive. Let's hear Greg Hunt on this issue this morning.
Let the panel speak for themselves. They have commissioned modelling. It's been done genuinely independently, and they, of course, will form their own views. But at the end of the day, it's a decision that the Cabinet and the party room have to make. I won't preempt that. My own view is that the renewable energy target is an important part of what we do. We are assessing what is the right balance going forward.
We've only got about a minute and a half left, but Greg Hunt of the view that it is important and it should remain, but he's not, well, he's certainly not unanimous. They're not unanimous, your colleagues, on that view, are they?
Well, Greg Hunt was absolutely right there. He said we've got to get the balance right. We're not going to preempt what this report will actually say. Renewable energy has been an important part of our commitment to reducing carbon emissions, and will continue to be so going forward. Let's see what this review comes up with, and then the Cabinet will consider it.
What about your colleagues who don't support it?
Well, there are some differing views among colleagues on this issue, but ultimately we've got to get an outcome which is in the best interest of not just the economy but also the environment.
Jeff Husick?
Well, in Parliament, Greg Hunt is the Environment Minister who never talks about the environment whenever he gets a question.
That's not true.
And the reason why is because on his side of the fence, he continually gets rolled. He was rolled recently on implementing the Coalition's own policy on solar panels. He's got a group of 20. He's got a group of 20. See, they get jumpy. There's a group of 20 MPs fighting against the RET.
They
are not going to. Yeah, I have individually. It's not hard to notice Neanderthals in your midst.
Oh, right.
And they should have Jane Goodall come in and study you guys.
Right, yeah.
And
she was on Q&A.
And the other thing is. Shameless Q&A reference on the Sky AM agenda. But the other thing is too, they don't want to do anything meaningful on climate change. They are pulling all the architecture, all the framework on it. They are moving from a system where the polluters pay to paying the polluters.
And the Australian people told you at the last election what they thought of your.
No, you're doing really well. You're doing very well on honouring promises.
Gentlemen, and but
we want to keep this going.
It was nice to be the birthplace of the bromance years ago, gentlemen. Thank you, Ed Hughes. Frydenberg.
Insert eye roll here.
Back in just a moment.